Before I can show you how to create a believable 200-year-old vintage look, I first need to see what truly weathered wood actually looks like. There's a local heritage site nearby with buildings from the early 1800s. Let's head out there and take a look. These impressive buildings have been standing here for more than 2 centuries, and just by walking around, a few things immediately stand out. The first thing I notice is the color. Almost everything has faded into this soft silvery grey. It feels quiet and mute, like the wood has slowly given up on its original color. Then there's the texture. You can see how the softer spring wood has slowly worn away over time, while the denser summer wood is still holding its ground. What's left is a gentle wave in the surface. As soon as the lights hit it, it comes alive, and that's exactly the kind of thing we need to recreate to make the wood feel really old. Cracks, cracks and more cracks. There are cracks everywhere, and it really sells the age. As the wood got older, it lost its flexibility, and then it could no longer respond to changes in moisture and temperature, and simply split. One thing that actually surprises me is the edges. I thought they would be way more worn down, but in a lot of places they are still surprisingly sharp. What actually creates that aged look is faded color, uneven surfaces, stress cracks, and all the small randomness that time and weather have left behind. To show you how to achieve this look, I'm going to build a lamp with a vintage feel. The lamp itself is a thick wooden disc with recessed downlights, finished with a raised outer rim that frames the shape and gives it a solid, handcrafted feel. I built the frame from 70 by 70 mm construction lumber. But since my table saw can't rip stock that thick, the first step was running it through the planer to bring everything down to size. Once the thickness was set, I moved it over to the miter saw and dialed in 22.5 degrees. The goal was to cut 8 identical pieces to form an octagon. My stop block couldn't go that near, so I had to improvise and clamped a temporary one instead. After each cut, I flipped the board upside down so the angle mirrored itself, which meant I didn't have to keep changing the saw setup. When I did a dry fit, the last piece didn't quite line up. I'm not sure what went wrong, probably a small setup error, but it was an easy fix before glue up, and tiny imperfections like that don't hurt a vintage build anyway. I then glued the pieces together, and I used rubber straps to hold the octagon in shape. Once the glue had set, I added a temporary center brace. The brace let me mark the center and makes it possible to add a pivot point for the router circuit jig. With the center marked, I drilled through the brace and set up the circuit jig. I really like this jig. The router sits at the end of a swinging arm, a bit like a pedal on a crank, and the arm rotates around a fixed center point. The router moves in a perfect circle, but its body never spins, so the cables stay straight and never gets tangled. I actually built this jig in an earlier video. If you want to see how it's made, you can queue that video up after this one by clicking at the link in the top right corner. I routed the outer ring first, then the inner one. Those extra grooves? That was a small geometry miscalculation. Nothing dramatic, but definitely not part of the plan. The inner cut stops about 5 mm before going all the way through, creating an inner frame ledge for the bottom panel to rest on. To clean up the outside, I rough cut the circle on a bandsaw. And then I used a flush trim bit at the router table. I really should have made a deeper groove from the top. It would have made the trimming a lot easier. Then it was time to separate the frame from the center brace. I flipped the piece over and taped everything down so nothing could move when the cut finally broke free. I used the router again with the same circle jig to release the inner section. To clean things up, I just needed a quick pass with a sanding block. For the top and bottom panels, I reused some old shelves. They were far too thick and heavy, so I planed them down to roughly half their original thickness. What I didn't realize at first was that some of those shelves had metal rods hidden inside the plastic brackets, which would have absolutely destroyed the planer knives. I caught it just in time, but it was a really close call. Here I glued two boards together for the width, not worrying too much about perfect alignment. A bit of unevenness actually works in my favor. Then it was back to the circle jig. I drilled a small center hole for the pivot, and from there it was just a matter of routing a clean circle. Alright, this is where the real secret comes in. This is how we get a true 200-year-old vintage finish. There is no single magic tool to achieve this. I layered effects instead, using a mix of light chopping, scraping, brushing and filing. Each steps add a little detail, and together they give the wood the depth and character that usually takes centuries to develop. Instead of hiding the joints, I brought them out. I opened up the glue lines slightly with the multi-tool, then softened the edges using a hacksaw blade and a small file. To get rid of the sharp edges, I grabbed an axe. It makes these unpredictable natural scars that just feels right. Sometimes it cuts deep, and that's perfect. The broken fibers are what really sell the look of aged wood. And there's a certain satisfaction in hearing the axe chop into the wood and to see how the fibers break loose. It's raw and I like it. The ledge is much more delicate, so heavy axe work here is sadly not an option. Instead, I used a deburring tool to gently round the edges. I also applied it to the rest of the frame, mainly around the glue joints, to soften the corners and keep the wear consistent. This little touch around the joints really helps the whole piece feel cohesive, like it's been handled for decades. One of my favorite tricks for creating a believable aged look is using nails with flattened tips. The flat tip cuts the fibers instead of pushing them aside. A small detail that makes a big difference. It's also a classic trick for preventing wood from splitting when nailing close to an edge. If you haven't tried it before, you really should. When you drive these nails in, they leave holes that look like old fastener marks, as if the wood had been reused. You can put them anywhere, but I like placing them near the glue joints. I only did 2 per joint, even on the same side. I can't really explain why, it just felt right. A lot of this process is about the feeling and what looks good to you. At the ends, I chipped up tiny fibers with a chisel. It looks rough at first, but that's the point. It makes the wood feel really old. To make the surface less even, I used a round nose chisel to scoop out small hollows. If I had to choose just one tool for this entire project, it would be the axe. With it, you can round over edges, add small imperfections, break loose fibers, and most importantly, create cracks that look completely natural. A real crack is simply wood fibers pulling apart, and that's exactly what an axe does. To create natural looking cracks, I gently roll the axe across the surface. The edge forms taper splits that start small, widen, twist, and then fade out. Just like real cracks. I often ended one crack and started another one right next to it. The same way cracks tend to jump in really old wood. You're not following a rule, you are adjusting as you go, based on what looks right. Finally, I used the restorer to brush away some of that softer spring wood, bringing out that wave in the grain, and at the same time blending and softening all the marks I made up to that point. I kept it restrained because pushing it too far risks erasing the very details I've been worked on so hard to create. After brushing, it was a bit rough, so I finished with that flap style sanding drum on the restorer. It feels smooth in the hand, but still looks properly aged. I have to say, I'm very happy about how it looks so far. The cracks and dents turned out exactly the way I wanted. Well, not exactly, but you get the point. I gave the same treatment to the top and bottom panels, so everything would match, including a few intentional axe marks for some extra flair. With 2 of the 3 key aging steps done, it was time for the last and maybe the most important part, the color. I wanted a warmer reddish tone instead of the usual grey. Grey can look great outside, but inside it feels a bit flat, so I mixed my own shade using oil-based stains. I used 3 colors in total. A custom blend of medium brown and mahogany for the main color, and a darker brown for the details. Mixing your own color gives you way more control over how it ends up. Using a small detail brush, I worked the stain into the cracks, holes and recesses. That way, they really stand out instead of disappearing once everything dries. Some stain always ends up on the edges, and that's totally fine. I just follow up with a bigger brush to blend it into the surrounding grain. That stops the surface from looking like one flat color and adds the kind of natural variation you see in real aged wood, where the sun and moisture don't treat everything evenly. For the most authentic weathered look, a fully matte finish usually works the best. But since this piece needs to sit alongside other furniture, I went a clear coat instead. It protects the wood without killing the vintage vibe. With the finish done, it was finally time for the electronics. After all, a lamp isn't a lamp until it actually lights up. I had 5 downloads to fit in a circle, so I started by marking out the circle and then the spots for each light. Doing this on the unfinished side made it way easier to see. Next came the holes. I drilled straight through each mark, flipped the panel and then opened them up from the finished side with a hole saw sized for the downlights. That way, the finished surface stayed clean and free from blowouts. The bottom panel doesn't fit perfectly, and that's totally fine. To make sure it sits centered, I designed and 3D printed these little brackets that hold it in place and press it down against the inner ledge of the frame. For the top panel, I set up a few mounting blocks around the frame. 3 were a bit bigger. They carry the screws for the top panel and also the hooks for hanging. I glued the big ones with wood glue and clamped them down tight, while the smaller ones got a quick dab of super glue. Before putting the top panel in place, I marked where all the blocks were with pieces of tape. That way I knew exactly where to drive the screws once the panel was on. This was also the first moment I got to see the lamp fully assembled, and honestly, it felt great to see it all come together. Next up came the screws. The tricky part was spacing 3 hanging screws exactly 120 degrees apart. I taped each spot to avoid tear out, drilled the pilot holes and countersunk the top panel screws so the heads would sit flush. I didn't have black screws, so I just painted a few to make them visually disappear. For the hanging hooks, I used a driver designed for this kind of hardware. Before installing them, I wrapped the hooks in masking tape so the finish wouldn't get scratched. Then came the hole for the power cable, the most nerve-wracking part. I wanted razor-sharp edges with zero tear-out. After a few experiments, I landed on a method that worked perfectly. I taped the area, drilled a slightly smaller pilot hole, then I enlarged it with the right bit, but spinning the drill in reverse. Doing it backwards pushes the fibers down instead of tearing them up. Honestly, it was probably the cleanest hole I have ever drilled. For wiring, I use a standard lamp cable with fabric sleeve for a nicer look. I tinned all the wire ends, it just makes everything easier to handle. To power the 5 downlights, I made a simple distribution cable that feeds all 5 lights from the same cable. I used a stiff metal wire to guide a cable out to each light opening. Once the cables were in place, I connected a lamp to each one and gently seated the lights into their holes. For the suspension, I chose iron chains for a slightly rustic look, inspired by the old nails and hardware I'd seen on the heritage buildings. Ideally, I would like even rougher, more weathered chains. They're not perfect, but close enough for this build. I left them a bit long so I could adjust the hanging height later, and ran the power cable through one chain to keep it hidden. And that's it for this build. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe.